Welcome guys, today second part of the videos I'm doing about basics about how to approach the DIY car diagnosis, or maybe not DIY, but this is directed to people who just like bought their first car, young people, BMW maybe they bought. That's why I'm not saying it's just for BMW, because this is purely for any car, like petrol car, gasoline car. So you want to do something because you're losing power, there's a like rough idle, maybe hard cold startups, hesitation on idle, stuff like that. So instead of like going to mechanics or swapping parts, you want to just find out first, and you're trying to search stuff on internet, on forums, but it's very hard to diagnose cars over the internet. I know it's myself, it's not easy. So today's second part about basic tests you should do. On the first video I did leak down test, not compression test, leak down test, because it's very simple, maybe not easy to do like compression test, but it's still simple test instead of some computers and scan tools. Some people don't know how to use them, but even if you don't have a leak down tester, or if you don't want to do it yourself, you can just go and tell somebody to do it for you and get the results. So if you have an old car, like my BMW is already now 13 years old, and you want to find out first what's the best thing to do before you start investing more money, because you want to keep the car for longer. So I said leak down test, it will tell you a lot of things. How to do leak down test I already did on my channel, 2 videos to explain how difficult it is when you're doing this on straight 6 engine, so you can check out my channel. And today another very simple test is fuel pressure test, which is basically another tool which you don't have to buy. You can go again and tell somebody to do it for you, but if you want to do it yourself, it's much easier to do like leak down test. I still recommend doing leak down test, fuel pressure test, and later I will explain in future videos what to do next. But today, fuel pressure test, I'm not gonna be testing on my car because it's great, so this is not best example to show you what to look at. But if you know where your fuel filter is, or your fuel rail, if it's equipped with the Schrader valve, some cars don't have it. BMW have that on top of the fuel line. On the fuel rail, no problem, but unfortunately I have a kit which doesn't include this particular adapter, so not great, but no problem with that. Why? Because it comes with this fitting, which is purely simple T-shaped connector which fits on both sides of the fuel hose. So I'm gonna be explaining you why it's actually even better than Schrader valve, which is on the end of fuel system. If you have something like that, only you don't have a adapter for BMW, but if you have something like that, and if you know where's the fuel filter, which is usually under the car, in the front section of the car under the footwell, and if you take one of the ends, for example here we have a filter, and this end goes to the engine, this end goes to the pump. So if you connect this end between fuel pump and fuel filter, and if you measure the pressure, the reading will tell you if the pump is giving you good pressure, or if it's enough pressure, or too low, or if it's stable. But if you connect this end after the filter, between injectors, which is the fuel line, and fuel filter, It will also tell you if the filter is not clogged or old or something. So you can do before and after the filter, and that will give you two results. If those two results gonna be the same, that means your system is fine. But what to look after, what to look for when you're doing a fuel pressure test? In M54 engine, in BMW M54 engine, fuel pressure should be stable always, doesn't matter if it's cold or hot, at 50 psi, which is 3.5 bar. So when you hook up your tool, the thing is, when you not starting your engine, you're just switching on the ignition, you should hear the sound from the fuel pump priming the system, like a special hiss you can hear at the back of the car, and you should see the fuel pressure rising and should stop at 50 psi or 3.5 bar. So that's first good indication. Then you don't start the car, you switch the car off or the ignition off, and you watch the needle what's doing. So if the needle stays at 3.5 bar or 50 psi for longer than 20 minutes, that's brilliant. If it's dropping like quickly after like few minutes and it's going down to zero, that will be indication of leak, maybe leak. Or another thing is, in the fuel pump there's a non-return valve. So if you're priming your system with fuel pressure, this valve will hold the pressure for quicker startup. So this valve is also important. It's fitted to the fuel pump, so if it's failing, you can't replace the valve itself. You need to replace the fuel pump. So again, if after 20 minutes or 50 minutes the pressure will stay at the same level, that means it's fine. So you know that fuel pump is fine. Then you can proceed to check the fuel filter, which is, like I said, between the fuel filter and the fuel rail, and again checking for the same thing. If the fuel pressure is the same, that means the filter is pretty much good. If it wasn't changed, you probably should change it, because in M54 engines fuel filter comes with fuel pressure regulator, which is like one item, one body. On M52TU, I will show you later on the example, this fuel pressure regulator is separately mounted into the fuel line, so it's on top of the engine. So I think it's pretty good design, because when you're changing your filter, you're changing the fuel pressure regulator. So one common failure of like fuel pressure regulator is gone, so you don't have to worry about that. And what else to look for is, when you start a car, you have your gauge hooked up and you watch what that needle is doing. If it's stable at 50 psi, or it's like bouncing. If it's bouncing a little bit, that's pretty normal. But if it's bouncing between, like for example 40 or 60, again it will be indication that there's a problem somewhere. Usually might be, like I said, fuel pressure regulator, or the valve in the pump, or the pump itself, or maybe big leakage somewhere. So you have to check that. If you turn your ignition with an engine is running and you see low fuel pressure, that means you should look for, and how to do it I just told you before, so no problem with that. If the pressure is too high, like above the specification, usually that's a symptom of failing or failed or bad connection, or no connection with the vacuum line going to the fuel pressure regulator, which is controlling, the vacuum is controlling the fuel pressure as well. So I will show you in a minute on an example how it's doing. So I think that's the best second test if your engine is good. Like I said, leak down test. You got no leakage or you got some leakage, even leakage, that's fine. That's the best second test you should do, or tell somebody to do it for you properly, and you will be having more information what your car is doing. So if you have some kind of power delivery problem and you know your fuel pressure is fine, you don't have to look for it again. You can proceed further and look for new things instead of maybe this, maybe that, and reading forums. Did you check the fuel pump? Oh, maybe I did it wrong, I should go back. No, just do step by step. If you do step by step, like I'm trying to explain you guys, you can save a lot of money and time. So instead of going forward, you should go forward, not backwards, or 2 steps forwards and 1 back. So now I'm gonna explain you a little bit about fuel tank, about few things, and fuel pressure regulator, which is very important part. Also the vacuum line, which is going to it. So stay with me. So let's assume that's the fuel tank in E46, as far as I remember. I'm not best in drawing, so apologize for that. So in BMW, at the back of the car, below the rear seat, you have the fuel tank and access to 2 things. The fuel tank is actually 1 part, but is divided on like 2 parts for better weight distribution. So on one side you have a fuel pump. Like I said, you have access from top, so if you lift the seat, you will have the access for the fuel pump with a level sensor. On the other side you have another level sensor. So on this part you have 33 liters, and on this part you have 27 liters. It's slightly smaller than the other one. And how it works, you're filling your tank. The first part fills in and overflows the second part, and fuel tank is full. But when you using your fuel, there's a special system, vacuum system, I think it calls I think jet pump, as far as I remember, which sucks fuel from here. So this part is always emptied first and this part is emptied second. So if you enter your hidden menu on the dash, you can actually check how many liters got in both sections. So when you're filling up your tank, this level sensor rising, and this section is filled with fuel, another sensor is rising, so it gives you summary of that, which is average 60 liters, plus this is around 62 top max. So that's how it works. And of course we got fuel lines going into the fuel filter, which is fitted with this fuel pressure regulator, and then fuel goes to the fuel line with injectors and intake manifold. If you watch my other videos, you will see whole picture of the intake manifold. You just browse my channel, there's lots of good takes about this intake manifold. And like I said before, on M52TU, this fuel pressure regulator was here. They moved it under the car, so when you change the fuel filter, you're changing this as well. Later I will explain you how this thing works. So the pump pumps the fuel into the fuel filter, later goes to the fuel line or fuel rail on top of the intake manifold, and if the pressure is too high over the 3.5 bar, I will explain you more how this thing works. It goes back to the fuel tank, and later it just flows between these tanks and end up in here. If this one is empty, it ends up in here, and you will get reading only from this level sensor. Also in the rear wheel arch, you have to take the plastic out to see like a special canister which holding the vapors. Later is like connected somewhere to the charcoal filter, which is filtering the fumes from the fuel tank, which is legal requirement in today's cars to not polluting the air with fumes from the fuel tank, which is actually dangerous because you might have ignition or something and fire in the car or something. So this charcoal filter filtrates the fumes, and later there's another line which is going to this valve you see on top, which is breather valve for the fuel tank, and those fumes are injected back to the intake manifold and they getting burned. It's the same system as CCV, which is taking fumes, oil fumes and air from the crankcase. So like I said before, you can use this T-shaped connector and hook it between the pump and fuel filter, or after the filter between the fuel rail. So that can give you two readings, and if they are the same, you're gonna be happy man. So before I explain you how this thing works, I need to tell you more about this valve, which is a very important valve. And sometimes you're gonna get code, something related to emissions, usually related to the valve, but this valve usually takes like an injector. It gives you a cycle when the engine is running, so it injects the fumes into the intake manifold and everything is running fine. But sometimes if this valve is stuck, for example, if it's stuck open constantly, there's like a constant flow of fumes, so that will enriching the fuel mixture in the engine because you're getting too much fuel or fumes instead of balance the mixture of air and fuel. So if it's stuck open, you're gonna get rich mixture, which indicates later on the fuel trims. How about fuel trims I'm gonna explain you later. But what if it's stuck closed, completely blocked, or maybe it's just dirty, might need some cleaning, but if it's blocked, so if it's blocked, no fumes going to the intake manifold, so you got fumes build up, pressure build up inside the tank. And what's happening, common failure or common indication is you're filling your tank, everything is fine, is full. Later when you're driving, it's halfway through, this side is empty, this one is still pressurized because this valve doesn't work. And okay, you see on your gauge you have half of fuel tank left, so you think, oh, I'm gonna fill it up. You go into the station, you're trying to fill up, but the tank is full, the gun just rejects, and you're thinking, what the hell, the gauge is showing half a tank. That's why, because in here you got only pressure, air or just fumes of fuel, no fuel at all. This sensor is not sensing any fuel because there's like too big pressure inside the fuel tank. That's why the fuel can't get to the other section. Usually that's the failure of this valve. It might be also the charcoal filter, but I don't think so. It's probably rare condition, but this valve is very important. So if you have some kind of situation like this, you can't fill your tank fully, check out this valve. So now we got our fuel pressure regulator, which is very simple device. It's mechanical, there's no electronics going into that, it's controlled with vacuum. So inside of that device we have a spring, which is here, and it's sealed. This chamber is sealed with diaphragm, probably rubber or something, and this port, this line, is the return line. So that spring is set, for example, for 3.5 bar or 50 psi, because it's dedicated to this car. And here we got our fuel filter, like M54, and this is return line and goes inside the fuel filter. So we got fuel in here, which is pressurized by the pump, and you can see inside this is the pressurized side, and this is the return side. So we got pressure in here, and if that pressure is bigger than 3.5 bar, this fuel will come back to the fuel tank, because the pressure is set by the spring. So at 700 RPM the car is idling. We need 3.5 bar to run the car, and we need that constant pressure all the time. Doesn't matter if it's 700 or 5000 RPM, but pump is pumping always the same pressure. We don't know what kind of pressure, probably higher, but we don't know that because we got this already in the system. So this spring is controlling, with this diaphragm, is controlling the same amount of pressure. So if you have 700 RPM, this port goes to the vacuum line, to the intake manifold, and we know at low RPM we have higher vacuum in the intake. So this vacuum, it's pulling the spring up, so this diaphragm is raising, so the fuel can come back to the fuel tank. Because the injectors are slow, there's no big action going on. But if we're raising the RPM to 2000, we need more pressure from the filter. This is another port from the filter which is going to intake or injectors. We need that pressure not to come back to the fuel tank, but it needs to go here. So when you're raising the RPM, the vacuum inside the intake manifold is going down. There's no vacuum actually at all, just small amount. So this diaphragm will actually maybe not fully closed, but it's gonna be closer to close that return line, so pressure can go to the injectors. So this spring and this diaphragm will be working all the time when you're raising your RPM or lowering RPM. This will work as a controlling device for the fuel pressure, to keep the same amount of pressure all the time. So if we have low RPM, this vacuum will raise the diaphragm, so too much pressure will go back. If we're rising the RPM, it will actually, the vacuum will drop. This will be closed, maybe not fully, but almost fully closed, and pressure is going at the same ratio to the intake or injectors. This is a fuel rail from M52TU. Here we got fuel feed for the injectors for the fuel rail, and here we got fuel pressure regulator. So like I said before, pressure is going here, is kept here by this part of the regulator, and whatever is coming back, it's coming back this way. So on M54 the fuel rail is looking different. There's no return. The return is already in the fuel filter under the car. Also it's missing here, fuel pressure regulator got its own fuel filter. So if you remove that, there's a clip. If you remove the clip, there's a fuel small filter. You can clean it if you want. Also recommend, again, I'm saying that all the time, I recommend cleaning the ejectors proper way, not just spray can and some batteries. I recommend sending them for proper checkup to make sure the fuel system is okay. And also same on M54, M52, that's the Schrader valve, but I don't have a adapter for it. But if you have, you can check the pressure in here as well. So guys, that was maybe not the best example of how the car works or the fuel system works, but that was just to give you an idea what to look after when you're trying to diagnose your car yourself. Leak down test will tell you what's the condition of the engine, the top of the engine, what's the condition. If you have any leak, it will tell you where this leak is. Fuel pressure test will tell you many things about fuel pump, fuel filter, fuel pressure regulator, and maybe injectors as well. So I recommend, for now, I recommend these 2 steps. What to do next, I will explain you in my another video. So see you next time. Thank you.